Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. I'm your host, Dana DePrima. There are about 2 million farms in the United States, and every year a significant number of the farmers running them are approaching retirement age with no clear plan for what happens to their land when they're done. This is not a small problem. Farmland doesn't just disappear when a farmer retires. It gets sold, subdivided, converted, or absorbed into larger holdings. And in a lot of cases, that means the end of a working farm, a community food source, and sometimes a family's 4 generations of work. Today's episode is about the people trying to interrupt that pattern. I sat down with Molly Johnston Heck and Olivia Fuller from American Farmland Trust's Farmland for a New Generation program, a New York State initiative that connects retiring farmers with the next generation of land stewards. And Olivia isn't just a program staffer. She's also a 4th generation farmer who used AFT's own tools to navigate her family's transition out of dairy and into direct-to-consumer beef, pork, and sheep. She knows this story from the inside. We talk about conservation easements and what they actually do and don't protect. We talk about who's looking for land, who's letting it go, and why those two groups so rarely find each other on their own. And we talk about what it actually takes to help a farm family make one of the hardest decisions of their lives. Let's dive into this important conversation with Molly and Olivia of American Farmland Trust.
So I am the 4th generation on Fuller Acres Farm in a small town called Fort Anne. We're basically halfway between New York City and Montreal, kind of the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. And we were a dairy farm for a long time. That's how I grew up, only child, helping on my family's farm. My high school sweetheart started working on the farm, or kind of worked on the farm and then became my high school sweetheart. And we supported my family's farm over the years, but I didn't think I was going to actually take over the dairy, and neither did he. It just was too much work and too little money, and we just didn't think that was going to work for us. So we both went and did our own things. I studied communications and ended up with this job at American Farmland Trust pretty soon after college. That'll be 11 years at AFT in April. And then my partner, Tom, he went to college at SUNY Cobleskill, learned about beef and other livestock. So kind of expanded beyond what he knew from doing the dairy farm work. And he got really excited about other types of livestock, about the pasture management. And he also really liked the pigs and the sheep. And so we decided in our mid-20s to come back to the farm and try to help my parents. And so my dad was getting to the point where he was ready to slow down, but didn't want to stop farming. Like, I don't think any farmer wants to stop farming. And that's where we started exploring the conservation easement opportunity. And so my dad went to a workshop, learned about what conservation easements were, applied for the state program, and we were very fortunate to get chosen that year. And so doing the farmland protection program and putting a conservation easement on our farm gave my dad the difference between what the farm is worth as agricultural land versus being able to be commercially subdivided. And you get that difference, and then the farmer can reinvest it in their business. So that helped my dad have a little bit of a retirement cushion that he didn't have before and pay off some of those long-time debts that he had. And it also got us thinking about, okay, what does the farm look like for the future? We kind of came back to the farm. It was a course of like 6 or 7 years in total between us, like coming back and like getting to the point we are today. But working with AFT, actually getting support from one of our Farmland for New Generation staff members, Tim Bello, who's also a farmer, kind of helped me navigate the process and was one of many people who were supporting me through this. But we ended up protecting the farm, and then a few years later, actually doing the transition of ownership from my dad to myself, and then also exiting the dairy business and allowing me to take things forward with my now husband. And we're raising beef, pigs, and sheep, and doing all of that direct to consumer. So I brought my communications and marketing experience to the business and helped us transition. It was like really during COVID that we made that switch to direct marketing. So I was selling stuff, out of the back room of the house, all USDA inspected, but just kind of starting there. And then we grew it and just got a lot of interest and made the case to my dad that, oh, this actually could work. And so it just kind of grew from there. And now we're in charge of the farm. My dad's still involved, but has that peace of mind that he doesn't have to get up every day and milk the cows twice a day and can ease into quote unquote retirement.
What does he think about the livestock switch?
It's grown on him. At first, I think he never saw himself, raising any other type of animal, but the beef were close enough. And we did it gradually. So, back in 2018, 19, we started to breed our dairy cows to beef. And so it was like the beef herd just kind of grew out of the dairy and kind of blended in. And then once we got to the point where we kind of had a critical mass of a herd where we had enough beef animals that we could say, okay, like we can actually make this like a business on its own. At that point, he was kind of ready. And he still gets to do a lot of the tractor work that he likes. And, he'll get on his four-wheeler and go check the cows. And so there's a lot of the same kind of activities that he is used to and like that are his livelihood. But he just doesn't have to get up and milk the cows, which he's actually grateful for at this point.
Let me ask a question just to understand a little bit better. So you said the value of the farm as agriculture versus the value of the farm subdivided, and the difference was a check to your farm.
So that comes from the state Farmland Protection Program. It has a funny acronym. It's FPIG. It's the Farmland Implementation Grants Program.
Farmland Protection Implementation Program.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. And so we're actually advocating for that, the state budget right now as well. So that has been in existence for 30 years. And this program is administered by New York State Department of Ag and Markets and provides grant funds across New York State for land trusts and other qualifying entities to put conservation easements on farmland and to hold that easement as a land trust.
And there are different programs. So there's also a federal program called ASIP-AL, and that's an acronym that stands for Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. But the programs are sort of like different and have different like criteria in terms of what qualifies as a good project in terms of acreage and soils and different things, but also different reimbursement rates. So the federal program reimburses less for that development value and for the easement overall. So we're really lucky in New York State that we have state funding. Not all states have state funding for easements. We're lucky that we have funding and that the reimbursement rate is so high. I believe it's like 87%, Olivia. Is that right?
That sounds right.
It's fairly high. It's like almost the full value of what the development value is that the farmer is getting back. And so this year, for instance, so last year there was a bump in the pool of funding to $25 million for this program. And while that still doesn't meet the demand, there's higher demand. Again, we're very lucky. Like it's not like that everywhere, right? And the process is cumbersome. It's New York State. It's bureaucratic and takes a long time. An easement process can take up to at least 2 years, up to like 4. And like land trusts have to do a lot of legwork to do like pre-applications with people to make sure that they are good candidates, right? So from that to the time that the easement closes and the farmer actually gets their check, it can be years, many years. Could always be better, right? Like anything, but we're really lucky.
And it's a one-time thing too. So it worked really well in our situation that my dad was ready or getting ready to transition the farm. Mm-hmm. And I was the next generation in line. So we were able to make that work. But like, let's say you're a farmer who doesn't have a next generation and you do that, the incoming generation or somebody who gets the farm down the line, who purchases it, the land will be assessed for a lower value because of the easement, or they'll theoretically be able to get the land for a more affordable rate, but it's conserved once. So it's not like you can do that again and again. And that's where the preemptive purchase can also come in handy if the easement didn't actually take down a lot of the value.
But even with all of these tools in place, there's a bigger question underneath it all. Who is actually making this work in real life? Because an easement on its own doesn't solve the problem. And affordability isn't guaranteed just because development is restricted. Land can still slip through the cracks, still get priced out, still end up in the hands of someone who isn't farming. And so what starts to come into focus is this whole layer that most people never see. People and organizations working behind the scenes, helping farmers figure out what their options even are, connecting them to the right people, and trying to piece together transitions that are actually workable. It's less linear than it sounds, more like a series of conversations, negotiations, and small decisions that build on each other over time. AFT sits somewhere in that mix, not as the one holding it all together, but as part of the network that's helping resource and support the people doing that work on the ground. Molly explains how AFT does this.
So we are a line item in the aid to localities budget through the state budget process. So every year, this time of year is bonkers crazy for us. And we go to the Capitol and we advocate for funding. We're a tiny line item compared to what folks are negotiating at large with the New York State budget. We're $700,000 right now is what we're advocating for. So it's a drop in the bucket compared to like housing and healthcare and all the things that New York State deals with. But yeah, and then we get a contract every year through the Department of Ag and Market and kind of set out our scope of work and our budget. And
a huge part of that too is turning around and making grants available to regional navigators who are organizations that partner with us in this program. And so that $700,000 isn't just like going back to AFT. That's being a large portion of it. I don't know percentage wise.
half.
Okay.
Yeah.
Half gets
So
regranted.
explain to me how that works. You get, let's say, $700,000 and half of it's going to these regional groups. Explain what that means.
Yeah, so we put together basically an RFP. That's a big part of my job. And Alex Morency, who also administers the website, the two of us really focus on that. But basically, we put out an application, and organizations who are spending staff time or want to be spending staff time and doing projects that are advancing farmland access and farmland transition can apply for grants. They're small. They're up to $25,000. And so it's the idea, we really want to encourage folks who are spending their time working directly with farmers and with landowners to really do like one-on-one technical assistance. We also will fund like workshops or things that will sort of get outreach that gets people in the room so that then they can do one-on-one technical assistance with those folks once they come to a farm transition workshop or something and say, hey, I don't have an heir and I really want to make sure that my land stays in farming. What do I do? And then hopefully that organization can then continue to work with them beyond just a 1-hour workshop.
What are some examples of the organizations that you've worked with in the past?
Several of them are land trusts across New York State, Cornell Cooperative Extension folks. There are multiple extension CCEs that are involved. But then there's also like a range of different nonprofits and Community Land Trust, West Branch Commons.
So any organization, it has to be a nonprofit or somebody working with a fiscal sponsor who is a nonprofit. So that's the restriction. And it's really anybody who is working directly with farmers and landowners to advance land access and transition. So creating tools and resources that are helpful for those processes, who are working, like I said, one-on-one directly with, for instance, land seekers to help them identify properties, evaluate their own goals, make sure that they have clear goals themselves, gain the skills that they need to actually be able to steward a property, connect with landowners, make sure that land is a good fit, helping to evaluate properties. You know, like, okay, I want to have a sheep farm. Is this land actually going to be good for that? Or I want to do diversified vegetables, but the soils here are terrible. Like maybe not a great plan. So making sure that it's a good fit, and then also kind of helping them walk through the process of, we need to develop a lease, and that lease needs to be secure and equitable so that the farmer is taken care of, but also that the landowner is getting what they want. So they can help make sure that that document is beneficial for both parties. Or helping them, you know, applying for an FSA loan can be challenging or confusing depending on, you know, your background, your cultural background, whatever it is, for anybody, honestly, for anybody with any level of education. And so just helping them navigate those processes, getting connected to the right people, making sure they have their documents in a row, all of those things. So it really runs like soup to nuts, like thinking about accessing land. I need help figuring out what that actually looks like for me, to like, I found this property, help me figure out what this lease agreement needs to look like.
What's interesting about this is how unglamorous it is. It's not one big solution or a sweeping policy that fixes everything. It's smaller, quieter than that. Money comes in, and instead of staying centralized, it gets broken apart and pushed back out into the hands of people who are already doing the work. People having real conversations with farmers, sitting at kitchen tables, helping them think through what happens next. And that's kind of the point. These transitions don't happen because of one tool or one decision. They happen because someone is there to help hold the process as it unfolds.
And they're also connecting with each other too. So there's a lot of like peer learning and networking happening. So they're sharing best practices and experiences. And AFT kind of facilitates that through the program to like have networking calls.
Yeah. So a good example of that is one we just did, which was, a lot of especially when we started this work, a lot of the folks that we initially brought into this network were land trusts, and we're really thinking about how to use conservation easements as a tool for land transition. So making land more affordable through the process of protecting it and then making it available to the next generation. And so we work with some pretty awesome land trusts around the state who have been doing this work for a long time and are really like creative in using the tool of land protection to make land more affordable, protect more land, make sure that like the land that is protected is good land for the next generation. Like there's different ways to think about it. And so we just had a call in January for regional navigators for them to learn from two land trusts, Columbia Land Conservancy in Columbia County, and then Genesee Land Trust out in the Rochester area. Columbia Land Conservancy talked about using a preemptive purchase right to further protect affordability of farmland, because in the Hudson Valley, even if you put an easement on a property, it doesn't necessarily mean that that land is going to be sold for less money because the value for second homeowners is so high at this point in the Hudson Valley. So a preemptive purchase right helps to keep that land more affordable for farming.
So with the conservation easement, you are giving up the right to subdivide that land and develop it, but you don't have to necessarily farm. Like it's not required that it's farmed or that it's sold to a farmer. It just can't be subdivided or taken out of being available for agricultural use.
And does that make it more affordable? I mean, I guess in some ways, yes, because you would be dividing it into teeny tiny condos, so that would make you a ton of money. But sometimes aren't the bigger, more intact pieces of land, let's say in the Hudson Valley, fetching a higher price because second homeowners want to.
That's where I think the preemptive purchase right comes in. Because yes, you can't develop it, but a second homeowner would be like, great, I don't want to develop it, but I'll still pay millions and millions of dollars for this property. It's still subject to the market, right? Like it's still subject to what somebody's willing to pay for it. So the preemptive purchase right is really the easement holder. So the land trust has the right when that property sells to kind of like step in and either purchase the property or make sure that it is sold to a farmer for agricultural purposes. Okay. Which, again, it's not a foolproof thing and it's not going to work for everybody, but it's a tool that allows one, make sure that the land will stay in farming and not just, again, as like an estate or like a view shed for some wealthy person who wants that, which is lovely, but is not going to produce food for our community. And therefore, the value is lower because it is specifically for agricultural purposes.
And when we're looking at your land link tool, for example, what am I seeing in terms of volume of landowners and land seekers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, I believe, I'm just going to throw out numbers, but I believe we have upwards of 250 land seekers on the site and about 130, 150 properties on the site. So we're always higher on land seekers than we are on properties available. Every land link that I've ever talked to, that's the dynamic. And the demand is outstripping the supply. I will say, though, some of those land seekers are perhaps quite aspiring and not quite ready to actually like purchase or lease a property, right? So there's also that dynamic that comes into play. So people see the website and they're like, oh, fun, like I'm interested in buying farmland. Not everybody is like ready to go and, hit the ground.
And there are options within the website for folks who are in that position where people can list that they have more of a partnership opportunity. Or, in leasing, so the land linking site has both leasing and purchasing and partnering options. And that's also where that like human touch of either American Farmland Trust staff on the FNG team or regional navigators are really crucial because they can help that farmer figure out, okay, what am I ready for?
And the other thing that we created a few years ago, which kind of like ebbs and flows in terms of how active and many postings there are, is a jobs page. So one of the things we were finding was like folks are really excited about farming and about the idea of having their own farm business. But really, we have found that the people who are most successful are the ones who have experience farming, who have experience managing a farm. And so we really wanted to create a page that was free, because there are some paid pages and some like listservs, but they're private, where you have to like know about them and then get an email, where folks could post on farm jobs. So not like, there's a lot of like agriculture related or food, like Good Food Jobs or those kinds of places that post a lot of nonprofit jobs and things. We really wanted this to be like experience farming. Come here if you're looking for a job on a crew or managing a farm or something like that. So that does exist.
So that serves as somewhat of a feeder into the, I'm interested in farming. Now I have experience in farming.
Exactly.
Now I need land to farm and I could be a partner.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And so correct me if I'm wrong, but the love matches here are between a farmer land owner who wants to transition to having someone else farm their land. And that could take the shape of a lease or a purchase or some sort of partnership agreement on that farm.
Yeah, it can look a lot of different ways. I think that's the dream scenario, right? Is like taking a farm that has been in production where someone has established their livelihood, established a business, cares about the land, wants to transition it, maybe doesn't have an heir that wants to take over the farm. And then this service and program sort of connects them to folks who might be ready to do that and helps facilitate that relationship. I would say also we do work with farm families. So actually, Olivia is a great example of like a farm family who maybe isn't posting their property on the website because they already have like Olivia was ready to take over her dad's farm, but they needed help like figuring out how to actually make that happen. So using a conservation easement, working with a land trust, all those tools still apply. It's not going to be on the website because it's not a public opportunity, but we're still working with those families to some degree. And then the other thing is some farmers have extra land available. So it's not that they're looking to pass on their entire business or their entire property and sell that ultimately, but that they are like, oh, I've got this additional like 5 to 200 acres, and either it's for haying or they're really willing to have somebody on there more intensively doing vegetables and they want to make an opportunity for a farmer. Sort of in that realm is also non-operating farmland owners, many of whom are in the Hudson Valley, although we see it creeping elsewhere in the state too, who care about the food system, own land that is good for farming and want to make it available to a farmer. And also, to your point, would love to have the ag assessment so that their taxes are lower, some of them. And so they want to make their land available as well to a farmer.
And AFT has done a lot of, Molly and her team have done a lot to educate non-operating landowners. I think one thing I really appreciate about your podcast and your communications, Dana, is like the idea that the onus should always be on the farmer to figure this stuff out and educate people. And I think this team does a really good job of kind of taking on some of that education and work to like, we've seen it not go well or be frustrating for both parties when a farmer and non-operating landowner like don't have the same expectations. So we've kind of identified that, and that's something that AFT has done a lot of work in.
What starts to take shape is less like a marketplace and more like an ecosystem, one that doesn't really function unless multiple layers are working at once. On the surface, it might look like a question of access. Who has land? Who needs land? But underneath that, there are deeper tensions at play. Land that holds value beyond farming, people drawn to farming for different reasons and at different stages of readiness, and a system that doesn't naturally sort those kinds of things out on its own. So what fills the gap isn't just infrastructure, it's interpretation. It's the slow work of clarifying intent, testing assumptions, and shaping agreements that can actually hold under pressure. And over time, what's being built isn't just a series of transactions, but a kind of shared intelligence where knowledge moves between regions, approaches evolve, and tools get adapted to realities on the ground. And that kind of work doesn't just happen on its own. It needs to be supported resourced, and coordinated, which is where organizations like AFT come in, creating the conditions for that ecosystem to actually function. I hear so many stories about farms and farm families that don't have a transition plan or that have a struggle in the middle of a transition plan, or a farmer dies and there's a squabble between maybe siblings. And what I hear a lot of is that the issues don't come to the fore until there's a foreclosure or some sort of real pressure point. And I'm just wondering, is this a program that can help in that?
Yeah. I mean, we hear that all the time. We get calls from people who are in crisis or are saying, I need to sell my property right now. They don't have 2 to 4 years. So yes and no. If we can really get in with people in time to have conversations, build trust. I mean, it's about relationships, right? So I think the folks who are connected to their community, to the service providers around them, who are like in spaces where these conversations are happening, are more likely to do that in their 60s, maybe, as opposed to their 80s. So I think that's where like the outreach that navigators are doing, while like not the end all be all, is a really great thing to have capacity to do, because they're saying, hey, is this just like a nagging thought in the back of your mind? Do you want to just talk about it and understand the process a little bit better? We're not saying you have to do tons of work, but like come to an hour-long session to just talk about what does transition planning look like, you know? So unfortunately, I think we do run into a lot of cases where something bad happens, right? Like somebody just has to sell the farm as quickly as they can, or there's a family dynamic that gets worse or falls apart or whatever it is, because time is just what is needed to figure out a lot of these challenging issues. So our philosophy is, how do we get people in the room sooner, honestly, which is the long-term solution. It's not a short-term solution. The other piece that I think we're really lucky to have here in New York is service providers that do operate better than we do. We're not equipped, like, we don't have social work degrees. We're not equipped to like operate in that space of crisis as well as other folks are, but we do have folks who are. So like FarmNet, which I'm sure you're familiar with, is a great resource that we have in New York that, again, not every state has, where there are social workers and financial advisors to be able to work with people. And I think that that combination is crucial. Again, it's not going to work for everybody. You have to be open to the support. And they're a regional navigator, and every state has this, but New York State agricultural mediation is another really important tool that I think people don't know enough about.
There's a deeper layer to this that goes beyond logistics or planning. It's about identity. For many farmers, the land isn't just an asset. It's a lifetime of work, a lineage, something that's been built and carried forward over generations. And that changes the nature of the decision entirely. It's not just what happens to the property. It's what happens to what I've spent my life building, and who, if anyone, can or should carry that forward. So when transition does come up, it's rarely just a technical process. It's tied up in pride, in responsibility, in family dynamics that don't always have clear answers. And when those pieces haven't been worked through, they do not disappear. They surface later, often shaping the outcome in ways that feel reactive rather than chosen. Which is why so much of the work here isn't just about creating a plan, but about creating the conditions where those deeper questions can actually be engaged with before the land changes hands.
So ag mediation is actually federally funded. It's a program that exists in every state. It looks different in every state, but basically it's free mediation services for farmers. And specifically their target areas have been, over the past several years, around farmland leasing and farmland transition. And we always say to people, like, again, in that spirit of not waiting until things get to a crisis, they are facilitators as well as mediators. So they can just help facilitate a conversation from the jump. You don't have to wait until you're in crisis or there's a conflict, right? I wish people used it more for that. Like, I don't think that that's like well known enough. And I also think people are scared to ask for help. And I think it's a weird thing to invite somebody into your family business. You know, where you're dealing with all sorts of like really sticky, intense issues that like we are not taught as humans how to approach, right? But there's so much wrapped up in those processes for farm families because their legacy, their retirement, their wealth is all wrapped up in that piece of land. Like, I don't know the solution, but I do think like those are some of the tools that are necessary. And I think that, again, our approach to it is get people in the room sooner so that they have the time. And then basically try to triage as we're able with the folks who are already in a crisis. And I mean, again, I don't think we are probably the primary service provider that they're interacting with when they're in that crisis. I think it's more like an ag mediation, more like a Farmnet. Again, someone who has a degree in mediation, somebody who has a degree in social work, like somebody who's really focused on those challenging situations. But those are the kinds of transitions that we're hoping to avoid.
Yeah, we're trying to convene them together too. So other organizations, our regional navigators, know that they can point people to ag mediation.
And we talk a lot about the team that's needed to support a farm transition. And so we are part of that team, but we are not necessarily the leaders or the most important part of that team. But Tim, who Olivia mentioned, will be working with an older generation on a farm who's looking to transition and will say, hey, I think it would be a good idea if you contacted ag mediation and brought them into this conversation because it seems like it's tough and let's have some support here, right? And maybe those folks, I know, for instance, I'm thinking of one example with a former coworker of ours, Jose, who was working with a farmer who was really struggling and actually ended up being part of that conversation with ag mediation to translate because they are Spanish speakers. And so we stay involved, but it's kind of up to the farmer. So a lot of what we talk about and what we do both at the state level, but honestly, increasingly AFT is doing also at the national level, is thinking about what is this navigator role and how can it be supportive? And also how can we train folks to have the communication skills, to have the listening skills, to be able to figure out how to help people, but also just we also can't tell them what to do, right? It's about active listening. It's just about, again, figuring out those communication skills and figuring out how they're going to best respond to different services or supports or helping them figure out their needs.
I'd love to hear a little bit. I know, obviously, Olivia, your farm is a great example of a success story here, but I'm just curious in the love matches that you have out there, how many partnerships have you created?
So to date, I will preface this statement by saying that it is very hard to track, as it turns out. Some people just go off and do their thing and we don't necessarily know about it, but we do ask everyone who has a profile on the website if they've connected with somebody. And we also ask our regional navigators to track. And to date, we have 234 matches on about 11,000 acres of land across the state since the beginning of the program in 2018. So that's leases, sales, and partnership agreements. I mean, the other thing that I like to say to people, a bad match avoided is better than having a bad match. We also want to see bad matches avoided. So if something falls through because it's really not going to work out for the farmer or for the landowner, we consider that a success too. And we don't track that necessarily. We're not oh, they didn't sign a lease and that was a good thing, and let's mark it down in our spreadsheet. We don't necessarily track that, but we do really value the fact that we're trying to actually make life easier for farmers and have more sustainable, secure, equitable farmland tenure and not short-term leases where a farmer's not secure, where they can't make a living.
Like you said, if I want to raise sheep and the land isn't good for that, it's not going to work out.
Right. We don't want that to become some kind of huge conflict later on that's then putting in jeopardy your livelihood and your business.
Thank you so much for being here with me for this conversation with Molly Johnston Heck and Olivia Fuller. One of the things that stayed with me is something that Molly said almost offhandedly, that a bad match avoided is a success. No spreadsheet captures that. No grant report logs the time someone spent on the phone helping a farmer realize that a particular piece of land just wasn't right for them, or that they weren't quite ready. But that work is real, and it really matters. Farmland for a New Generation operates in New York State, but the pressures they're responding to are everywhere. If you're a farmer thinking about what comes next, or a landowner who wants to see your land kept in production, There are people ready to have that conversation with you, and sooner is better than later. That part I want you to remember. You can learn more at farmlandforanewgeneration.org, and I'll link to American Farmland Trust and their current advocacy efforts in the show notes. Thank you for listening to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. If this episode sparked something for you, I hope you'll share it with someone who cares about where our food comes from and where it's going. Also, through the For Farmers movement, conversations about farmers like these become action, supporting hardworking farmers and strengthening the connections between the people who grow our food and the people who eat it. You can learn more at forfarmersmovement.com and follow along on Instagram at XOXOFarmGirl for more insights that connect food to health, community, the environment, and our economy. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review it on Apple Podcasts. It helps more listeners, just like you, find these conversations and helps to grow a community that believes that food is a lot more than just food. This episode was co-produced by Sonia Dillon, with sound design and original music always by Russell Chapa. I am your host, Dana DePrima, and I'll see you next week for another episode of One Bite is Everything. Until then, eat like it matters, because it does.